1. And we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Best Phone Plans Podcast. Joining us today, we have special guest Roger Entner. Roger is the founder of Recon Analytics and has built a reputation as one of the most respected telecom experts. He brings with him a wealth of knowledge and industry expertise, and we're so excited to have him here today. Roger, how are you doing today?
I'm great, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. With your prowess and industry knowledge, what Dennis and I kind of wanted to talk to you about is the different carrier strategies in for Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. You know, in the past, we've seen the carriers diversifying their product stack and revenue, such as AT&T acquiring DirecTV, HBO. But with 5G, we're seeing a new emphasis on wireless. I'm wondering if you can comment on what the future strategies are of these carriers as they continue to grow and how they may differ from each other.
Well, one of the things you always have to look at is whenever we get a new generation, the competitive maybe strengths and weaknesses of the previous generation don't necessarily carry over, right? So, for example, when we look at T-Mobile, T-Mobile used to be the runt of the litter, right? When uh, John Ledger took over, the company was number four, struggling. He rejigged the company, and I think he gets a lot of credit for the marketing part, the positioning part. He doesn't get enough credit for how much he improved the operational excellence of the company because it's now executing on par, if not better, than their competitors. So traditionally, they were budget prices for budget experience, right?
Yeah, that's how I remember them.
And now they have a lot of spectrum. And spectrum means speed. It makes life a lot of easier. Spectrum is the oxygen, the fuel on which wireless carrier operates. And they currently are on an oxygen high, right? And now they want to provide a premium experience for a budget price. And that's a winning proposition, right? So the question is, how long will this continue? So when they talked about it in their analyst day, right? They were like, "Oh, we're going to keep winning for the entire 5G area."
Right. What?
Well, if history tells us anything, then that's not going to happen. Because in the beginning, whoever has a lead for 2 and 3 years, and then the others catch up, right? And they just spend more money or catch up. T-Mobile caught up, right? And in a much meeker position. And towards the end of the 4G era, they basically had network parity in the big cities. And they had, with the acquisition of Sprint, more than 50, sometimes 60% market share. Amazing stuff, right? Uh, but everybody cooks with water, right? So it's almost inevitable that the advantage, the first mover advantage that T-Mobile has right now, will be eroded. So then we have T-Mobile, then we have AT&T, for example. And by the way, how they get there is basically everybody is suffering from Google and Facebook envy. You know,
Yeah.
uh, we built these networks, spent billions and billions of dollars, and these young kids make billions of dollars in Silicon Valley based on our hard work. That's really unfair. Let's make changes and change things. AT&T looked at it and said, like, what are people doing on our networks? Oh, they're watching videos. Why are we not buying a company that sells videos? The biggest one around, DirecTV. Well, they didn't realize at the time, or maybe they didn't want to realize, that the content distributors are being squeezed to death by the content owners. So all these price increases you see every year from cable companies, from the satellite companies, is not because they are greedy, but because the content owners are jacking up the price all the time.
I see. I see.
And everybody hates the guy who delivers them the bill, right?
Right.
Right, right.
Whereas it's actually handing through. And you're seeing that if you're building now a bundle of streaming services, it's as expensive as a cable bundle, right?
Yeah. We've gone in a full circle. It's backwards now again.
Because because the content owners, you know, a leopard doesn't change his spots, you know, and that's why then AT&T bought a content maker, right? And the biggest one available was Time Warner. So that's how they got into content game.
I see.
And they were trying to sell a premium experience on a premium network. And that's why they have now the fastest network, until T-Mobile might pull away.
Right, right.
But at least they can say, we have the fastest network. And the stuff starts breaking if you position yourself as the premium provider on a budget experience, right? And when you look at it, at what's happening with AT&T right now, they have a lot of discounts on devices, right? And they're giving you more content, all of these stuff. So the positioning becomes less premium, which is not a bad thing. It becomes a better value, right?
The perception to consumers is they're able to get a better deal on their devices, and because they're getting all these discounts, somehow it just feels less premium, even though the service is really the same.
Exactly, but you have a better value for money experience. And also during their investor day, they talked about, we want to grow subscribers. You can only do that with a better value proposition.
So with the carriers, trying to become a better value option on their plans on the postpaid side, where do flanker brands and MVNOs come in this strategy? Because traditionally they've been the target demographic for those value-oriented customers. So where do MVNOs and flanker companies come in for the carriers in their strategy?
Well, they're struggling, right? When you look at traditionally, when you see what happened in the last recession, we lost postpaid subscribers for several years, and prepaid really took off. Now with the massive stimulus funding, we don't see that at all. Actually, postpaid goes up further and further, and prepaid is holding the steady or going down. So the flanker brands are somehow left out in the cold. And we'll talk about it with Verizon, because they were probably looking at it and said, like, in 2008, prepaid really, really took off. And we have no prepaid brand because we're the premium company, right? And I don't want to have these budget people. They only drive my ARPU down.
Right.
And then they're like, well, Carlos Slim, who owns TracFone, is sick and tired of the US. He wants out. Let's buy it. And then the market doesn't take off, right?
Right. Yikes.
So uh, the story that they will tell is, look, we can sell it now at a higher margin. The problem is TracFone has only about between 5 and 15% margin, depending on when you look at them. That's not a dramatic lift for a premium brand.
Sure.
And when you look at Visible, I have friends in Denver, and they all talk about how Visible is there, how many events there are, all of these things. But I'm sorry, outside Denver, it's invisible.
So you don't think people are signing up for it outside of Denver?
Look at the numbers. The prepaid numbers for Verizon are going down or the same. And that's with Visible offering a $25 plan where you find up to 10 people on the road, right? Say, hey, want to have unlimited wireless for $25, and we do separate billing. We don't even have to talk to each
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
and the numbers still don't take off.
Wow.
You know, a a challenger brand means like you're trying, but you're not successful,
Sure.
right? That's a challenger. Winners are the ones who are successful.
I find it interesting though because at least with certain segments, like for example, the cable operators like Comcast or Spectrum, they've been seeing a lot of growth on their cell phone side of the business. And there's only one way that they're getting it in this saturated market. It means they're stealing customers from postpaid. But you're telling me that overall prepaid hasn't been growing at all.
No,
Huh.
prepaid has gone down.
Wow. Is so as part of the Verizon TracFone acquisition, because Verizon owns the underlying network that many of these TracFone brands were using, are they able to improve their margins, or is it still just
By maybe 10%.
Okay. Okay.
Because TracFone's a profit margin is about 10%.
Oh, and so Verizon was making a profit on that, and so when you stack those two together,
Yeah.
it's maybe 20%, maybe
No, that's
15.
it, 10%.
Yeah, yeah.
There's
Okay.
10% that TracFone can give now uh, to Verizon. And
Okay.
it's so small compared to the rest of the company. Overall margins will maybe go up a percentage or two,
I
somewhere in
see.
the noise area.
So it's almost nominal. It's probably a disappointing investment in retrospect for Verizon.
Yeah, I don't know if they would do it if they would have the time to do over right now,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, have the other carriers like T-Mobile and AT&T approached the MVNO market differently? How have MVNOs played a role in their network strategies?
Well, traditionally, MVNOs were used to attack a market that you don't want to or cannot serve profitably. And there was a time where everybody wanted to be an MVNO, and I thought the carriers are stupid idiots. These guys don't know how to do marketing and these things, and we just have to show up and we'll steal them blind. And that's from really small guys to Disney, all the way up. Uh, there was Disney Mobile, ESPN Mobile. You know, there's a whole graveyard of ESPNs and of MVNOs because it's a really difficult business model. Um, the moment you see an MVNO doing television advertising, you know they're losing money
Oh,
That actually sounds backwards to me. Why would that be the case?
because it's too expensive. Your margins are way too thin, and television advertising is very expensive.
Do the television ads in some way pan out? Like they're hoping they'll get enough customers to profit off of that, or Is it just they're throwing money away and hoping for the best?
Historically, it has never worked. The only MVNO who has made money and consistently made money and has grown was TracFone. They only did advertising for Straight Talk once they hit like 10, 15 million customers, 10 million customers or so, right?
Wow.
That's so interesting because I know Mint Mobile. I remember seeing their Super Bowl ads. They're all over the place, and whenever you look at them, you feel like they're doing so well. But
No.
you're telling me that it probably means they're actually running out of money. That's scary.
Well, Ryan Reynolds has a lot of money, and he's going to use that. And so have others before, and it never ended well. Whereas TracFone and the guy who really drove TracFone to growth, FJ Polak, wonderful, wonderful man, sharp, and the quietest guy in the room. And you underestimated it, but sharp as a whip, focus on the fundamentals and keeping costs low. So they went to the bodegas, they sold at Walmart, but the advertising was billboards, right? It was not ego driven. There was no FJ in a TV commercial with somebody from a Star Wars persiflage, right? So prepaid and especially MVNO margins are razor thin. Your advertising has to be organic, very low cost. TV is the anathema of it, right?
Wow. Yeah. So it sounds like they're just throwing money away, and the margins are so slim. I'll just cross off my idea to start my own MVNO right now and kill that bird before it takes off.
Do an accounting degree.
Okay.
Because when you look at it, TracFone, it's run by Mexican accountants, basically. And they're really bean counters. And that's the only way to win in prepaid, and especially as MVNO.
So, Roger, as we've been talking, it sounds like postpaid isn't necessarily doing too great because you're telling me ARPU's coming down. Sounds like MVNOs and the prepaid market is shrinking, which is the opposite of what all these companies want. What do they need to do to drive growth so that people like Verizon can get their return on investment because they're spending billions on this 5G network? And what do the MVNOs have to do to survive?
So all of these companies, like the network operators, they're doing well. Okay, show me an industry with 45 to 55% gross profit margin, and I show you a healthy industry, right? And they're often being derided as a dumb pipe. If you make 55% margin on being a dumb pipe, I'll be a dumb pipe, right? And keep your scorn with your 10% stuff. But the networks are getting much, much, much smarter. The investment in the networks, they have to invest anyway. It's not like if there wouldn't be 5G, they couldn't invest, because wireless usage goes up and the margins here are still very high. So how do you build your niches? And that gets us, for example, to Verizon. Verizon basically is trying to get more money from the same customers that they have and get them from more basic plans to more premium plans. And they're throwing in Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and all of that stuff. And with that, they get customers to pay $10 more. They throw in a little bit more data. They probably pay $4 or so for Disney Plus, that you pay $6 or $7 for it. But Disney will raise prices, They did that already.
Yes, you're right.
Do you think that they're cutting Verizon a deal and not raise prices on Verizon?
No, why would
No.
they do that?
Neither do I. And for example, you see that T-Mobile, right? Uh, they did this promotion immediately, family plan, Netflix on us, right?
Yep.
If you're a T-Mobile customer, you realize that it was T-Mobile plan on us plus $1 from you when they raise prices. Now it's Disney, Netflix on us, and $2 from you. In a couple of years, it will be Netflix. Let's go Dutch, right?
Yeah.
Because they can't hand down the price increases. Because in the wireless industry, prices are staying stable or go down.
Right, right.
And consumers don't stand for price increases.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to have a price increase in the wireless space. You know,
Yeah.
people either feel like they should be locked into their plan, or they'll switch to something else if that happens.
Yeah. Let me tell you how economists call that, but I'll start with a joke. What do you get when an economist becomes a mafia don?
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
An offer you can't understand, right?
Well, that sounds accurate.
Yeah, and so what the wireless industry is a non-collusionary oligopoly with a kinked demand curve.
Okay.
Exactly. What the heck is that?
Yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit
So
for us?
non-collusionary means they don't agree on prices in smoky back rooms, right?
Okay.
Oligopoly means there's only a limited number of them. And a kink demand curve means prices can stand the same or go down, but never up, because when the prices go up, the non-collusionary thing comes in and people switch to the lower offer, right? And we see that all the time. So it's actually a very competitive market.
Sure.
And
Actually,
that brings us to Verizon, right? The reason why they invested so much money in the C-band spectrum is they can't afford to be the slowest. And before the C-band auction, they had the least amount of spectrum, which means they probably would end up at the slowest. And being the premium provider on the worst network, not going to work out.
not a good value proposition
Not a good value
for
proposition.
customers. Yeah. So with such a saturated market, you know, we had Peter on last week, and he was saying that device saturation is at like 130% or something, where people have smartphones and the same people have tablets or smart wearable devices. What are these major carriers doing to try and win customers from the other providers?
Well, either better deal or better experience, right? And you're looking forward to 5G making a major impact. And so we talked about network slicing, right? I wrote a paper about it. It's on my website.
It's actually
Recon.
linked in the video description as well for
Awesome.
anyone curious.
So if it's a little bit too technical, let me know. So basically, one of the things we see in the wireless industry, it's traditionally the wireless industry was like your kitchen, right? Every network element was like your toaster, your microwave. It had hardware and software combined with each other, and it didn't work anywhere else. Now, what's happening is it all turns into software-defined networking, meaning the wireless networks are becoming like a big computer, and they run different software on it. And the software that, there's a software for being the toaster, software for being the microwave. But here the elements are messaging, voice, data, all of these things. But when you turn it into software, you suddenly can allocate dedicated resources to it. And that way you can guarantee performance. And you can specialize parts of the network for specialized purposes and applications. So, for example, uh, you have a customer who runs a lot of video that need and high quality video that needs a lot of resources on the radio access network because say 4K video uses 25 megabits per second, but it doesn't need that much on the back end. So you allocate a lot of radio network assets to it, but not a lot of computing. The other customer, say, is an online game, right? Online games, contrary to what everybody talks about, don't use a lot of spectrum and a lot of data. You can run a game on less than a megabit per second. It's just latency dependent. So you don't need a lot of things over the radio, but you might want to run it on, it needs a lot of computing because every bullet that flies needs to be computed and all of that stuff. So you put a lot of compute resources behind it. And now you can do this very, very effectively and efficiently. Or, you don't run the networks anymore. Like, you have a grocery chain. Every payment goes to a centralized application. Somebody breaks in, 50 million people lose their identity and their credit card information and all of that stuff. Now imagine you break that down in a more regional approach on wireless, and suddenly that big data heist, it turns into data pickpocketing. Because only 1,000 people are impacted, not 25 million people.
Sure.
So these are all the things that will be possible with network slicing.
Yeah. Dennis, I think you had a question about this. It was really good.
Not about the network slicing. If you do, go ahead. I had actually something a little.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I guess my question is, how are the carriers dividing the resources? Is it percentage based? Like this percent of the network goes to this task and this percent to something else? Or is it more you can block it off? Like for video streaming, blocking off a 10 megahertz chunk just for that specific use case? Or is it something different?
Right now, it's not happening because you need a standalone 5G core.
Okay.
The only carrier in the world who has a 5G standalone core is T-Mobile, and T-Mobile hasn't activated that feature yet. So all of that network slicing, stay tuned.
Okay,
right?
we'll keep our eyes out. What's your estimated timeline for that? Like, when do you think we'll start seeing that being deployed?
2 years.
Okay.
Right. Right now, the holdover is basically build private networks. But then every company, every application builds their own little network, and that's not very scalable.
Yeah.
So, Roger, what I wanted to ask is how. So you mentioned earlier, like the carriers are like an oligopoly. Okay, so there's three of them. They're not colluding, but they're also not trying. They don't really want to lower prices, right? I know you said the profit margin was 50% or better, but if I'm a company, especially if I'm trying to please shareholders, I want my profit margin to be higher, not getting reduced any tinier. And as Stetson pointed out, the market's saturated as far as mobile cell phones are concerned. So what are the carriers going to do to either
Lower
differentiate
cost.
themselves so that they can get more growth, or how are they going to increase their revenue in other ways? Like, what can they do from here? Like, what is 5G letting them do in the future that they couldn't have done with LTE, basically?
Lower cost. So, for example, using 5G to deliver a bit to you costs 1/10 of what it costs under 4G.
Wow. Why is that? Is that because of the network core, the change in architecture,
More,
or
that comes next. Simply because you have fatter pipe, more efficient way to deliver, the cost per bit goes down dramatically. Now, when you look at if you look at AT&T over the last 5, 6 years, AT&T was the first one who switched to software-defined networking. The entire increase in profitability of AT&T came through the switch to software-defined networking. The
wow,
entire increase,
that's insane.
because because you need a lot less people. So, for example, AT&T has about 100,000 people employed in their network group, right? Uh, and they're working on virtualizing all of that, having done a lot of progress. Somebody like Rakuten in Japan, they run a carrier. They have 200 people running the network.
Yeah, I think you had a another recent article about Rakuten's service. They're actually selling it to
Yes,
other carriers, right?
yeah. So if the carrier becomes a lot more efficient by making that network fully virtualized, you know, one guy in headquarters can press a button and every cell sites get reprogrammed. Right now, somebody has to walk out to every cell site, all 50,000, 70,000, 85,000 of them, and make the change manually.
Yeah. Wow.
Understood. And Roger, someone that we haven't been talking about yet is Dish. Where does
Hmm.
Dish fit in all of this? Because I'm curious to know how they're going to either shake up the market, and if they might even have an advantage since they get to start out with not having to replace all this legacy tech.
Well, they have an advantage and a disadvantage, right? The advantage and disadvantage is they start from zero, right? Uh, so they will build a more efficient network, but the network is only part of it. Marketing, stores, all of that is ridiculously expensive. The same problem that MVNOs had with television advertising and all of that stuff is also the problem that Dish will have. And so we talked about the cable companies, right?
Right.
I don't know. Are you a cable company customer?
Yes, because Comcast has monopoly on my apartment.
Okay. So when you watch Comcast, there's advertising for Comcast Mobile, Xfinity Mobile, right?
Right.
You know how much Comcast pays for these ads?
Zero.
Zero, because it's unused inventory. So for them, it's very, very efficient. So Dish will do the same thing for Dish satellite subscribers and probably bundle the heck out of it. But they need a lot more customer, and so it's very, very expensive to get these customers. Typically, you can say it takes about a year before a customer becomes profitable.
Wow.
And then the question becomes how quickly can Dish grow, especially as its satellite customer base comes down. The faster the satellite customer base comes down, the less money they have, they can pour into mobile. But that's exactly why Charlie Ergen got into wireless, right? He he experienced the content owners squeezing him to death. You know, he saw that people started hating linear television, and you can draw a line when his subscriber base and the satellites will hit the ground, right?
Right.
And he
Right.
said, like, this horse will not ride anymore at one point in time, right?
Well,
I need another horse.
well,
And that's
with
when he started in investing in Spectrum. And look back how long that was. He was very visionary with that. He saw that earlier than anybody else, right?
well, with how quickly we're seeing a decline in live television subscribers, why is Dish feels like it's so slow to move? I mean, today marks a year now since the merger
It's
actually
not
took.
slow. It's such a massive undertaking. They're not slow at all.
Do we know what they're doing? Are like they building sites or?
Yeah,
They're
like we haven't
building
heard anything.
sites, they're putting that all together. It takes about 2 years to get started.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. And out of curiosity, with all of the the TV ads and the sponsorships that we see all the big carriers doing, like what is their average cost to acquire a customer?
All thrown in,
Sure. Yeah.
$300-ish,
Wow. That's crazy.
right?
That I think yeah that kind of puts it in perspective. I think we had Ahmed Katak from US Mobile on there in MVNO and he was saying they don't really do advertising. I doubt too many people have heard of them outside of my channel, and I think their cost is like $30 to $60. I want to say per customer or something like that.
Yeah, the $30 to $60 is the $30 is probably their service activation cost. And $60, there are some costs to get somebody to sign them up. That's the commission, right? And then you layer on top of that advertising, and you layer on top of that handset subsidies,
Ah,
because there are still handset subsidies.
yeah, with the like the trade-in deal, we had Verizon launch their trade in your cracked device, and you'll get up to $1,000 off. Like they're
Yeah,
they're taking
exactly.
the L. So, as I guess Dish is building out their network, and we'll see them appear in maybe a year from today, maybe a year and a half, depending
Mm-hmm.
on their rate and how long it goes. What are the factors that are going to cause customers to leave their existing carrier? Like, are they going to like is the coverage going to be bad or the speed's going to be slow? Likely not with 5G, but like what would the factors be that would cause someone to look at their Verizon plan and then look at Dish and think about potentially switching?
Lower price,
That's
right?
is price the number one factor? Like, is that all
It's
people?
always
Interesting.
in every industry. It's price, quality, service in this order, right? You always want to have a better deal, right?
Yep.
Quality, with quality being the same. The moment you're not happy with the quality, you're looking a better deal. And service only comes in when the company messed up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And then that keeps you in the company or not, right? And if they're bozos, you said like, screw this, I'm leaving, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's no. That sounds 100% accurate. With
Right.
Dennis shared his story earlier in one of our episodes. He walked into, I think Dennis was a Verizon store, right? And they just
Well,
treated you.
I've had stories with all three carriers at this point. Verizon, when I was younger, I was signing up. I was looking to sign up for a cell phone service for myself. Verizon treated me poorly because I was a young buck and they thought I was probably broke. So I just went over to T-Mobile and got set up with them, which I've been with them now for 6 and some change years.
Mm-hmm.
But then I went and updated my plan with T-Mobile, and that was a separate episode. And if their customer service wasn't so good, you were right, Roger. I would leave them because I had a pretty bad customer experience. But thankfully, one of our awesome fans on the show worked for T-Mobile and helped me to get the information I needed to get straightened out.
Yeah.
That's amazing. All right, we have another round of questions would be related to the new service bundles these carriers are throwing in. You're now getting Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN Plus. You're getting the Netflix on Us, even if it's now $1, $2, or $4 extra. What is the strategy behind integrating these services? Is it boosting profits for these
Yeah.
carriers? Is it how are they making more money off of that?
Well, take Verizon, right? If you're on a metered plan and you upgrade to the top premium plan, that's $20 more a month. And they pay 3 or 4, maybe 5 for the Disney Plus. So that's $15 for them. The marginal cost of a megabyte is extremely low, right? Wireless is an industry with a very high fixed cost because you need to build that network, and very low variable cost. Um, and only when you hit penetrate or when you hit capacity, you need to split a cell site. You need more spectrum, all of these things. But overall, if you're using a megabyte more or less, doesn't cost really anything more or less, right?
If data, so since data costs are so low, why do we typically see all of the carriers put some arbitrary limitations in on their plans? Like no premium carrier, for example, is just doing straight up unlimited data, use it how you want with unlimited hotspot, right? No one's doing that right now.
Yeah.
And why are they not doing that? Because to me, like if I was a carrier, I'm like, unlimited hotspot, unlimited data, I'll charge $100 for this plan, which is even more than everybody else. That would be an easy way to make money, and I'm sure they'd get some premium customers to switch just because of it.
Because some idiot is going to run their web server on it. They've done this, okay? There is a small number that will abuse this and ruin it for everybody. They will use, your neighbor will run then their web server on it and ruin the experience for everybody in that cell.
Right.
And so in a square mile or 2 square miles, nobody else can have service because it's a shared resource. Or I know of somebody, there was unlimited texting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody signed then up for text messaging alerts for horse racing.
Okay.
For every horse race on the planet. That is thousands of text messages a minute.
Whoa.
That's why they put a limit there. Because somebody will find a way to break it and affect everybody else.
Couldn't you very easily, though, either block off ports that are needed to run a server or just do some form of like packet sniffing to ensure that it's not being a...
Well, that's what they're doing. They give you 50 gigabytes of usage, right? What are you going to do with 50 gigs?
Well, 50 gigs is an actual like hard limit. I meant like, couldn't I, as the carrier, just look at and see like, okay, like this IP address is obviously Google. This IP address is obviously X, Y, and Z. And, I know that you need port 545 to host a Microsoft, like whatever server, right? And I see
but you can change the server. You can change the port. You would need an army of detectives to find a bunch of idiots that try to build the things to break the system. You rather say, here's the usage that takes care of 95% of the people, right?
And then also, I mean, with 5G, like the promise of 5G is, I know nothing's unlimited, but 5G is promising basically so much capacity that it can handle anything, right? I mean, they're talking, Verizon shows their whole hospital surgery things. They're talking about home internet replacing with 5G.
Yep.
I mean, if they really wanted to be a home internet replacement, like some of them are talking about, isn't having to deal with that kind of network usage par for the course, right? Like Comcast, right? Cable internet, right? It's a shared resource too. I know it's obviously much more capacity because of the DOCSIS standard, but Comcast couldn't just come in and tell me like you're using your 400 megabit internet wrong, right? I mean, it's kind of funny, right? Like,
no. So one strand of fiber has more capacity than the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. So for some of our customers, we did some analysis, right? And so, for example, where was it? Oh,
It's great. We're getting a real inside scoop from like real studies that were done.
where was it? I'm looking for it. Here. So, for example, if you have 10 megahertz in midband, right? Each cell can provide 10 gigabytes of data per hour, right? But that is shared with everybody in that cell, right? So how many people do you need? How many people do you want, right? And so, for example, when you do the math, you realize that Verizon can't do, even with the 100 megahertz of C-band spectrum that they have, in an urban area, they cannot do broadband to the home with wireless, just using C-band spectrum. It's not enough spectrum. Or you can serve only 10 people. Congratulations. That's not a scalable business model.
Sure.
But the moment you put 400 in millimeter wave around, or 800 or 1,000, what they have, suddenly that works, right? But millimeter wave, that signal goes 200 yards, right? Not a scalable model again.
Well, I mean, putting up a millimeter wave site, I think it was Sneed told us it was only like maybe like 18,000 per millimeter wave site or something around that range, which is not that expensive, and it's still cheaper than like what a cable operator has to do as far as laying like fiber down, right?
Well, you still need fiber, but $18,000 divided by how much do you want to pay per month? $50, right?
Somewhere in the realm of like 60, 75.
Hold on, let me do the math. 18,000 divided by 75. That is 240 customer months. Before you pay for the T1, for the fiber and all of that stuff.
That's before you even start making money off of that investment.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you need one customer or 10 customers need to be there for 2 years just to pay for that cheap $18,000 site.
And then as you multiply the number of sites you need to serve an area properly, it just keeps going up.
So 5G makes everything easier, but it's still not an unlimited resource world. So in 5G, your data limit will go down by a factor of 10. You get 500 gigs instead of 50, right?
Sure.
Or that's roughly what they think. Right now, AT&T said that their average fiber customer is at 300 gigs a month. Charter said both publicly, said it's between 600 and 700 gigabytes per month. I don't know what the people do with 700 gigabytes a month, but not my problem, right?
Sure. Actually,
making me feel bad. I use over a terabit a month.
Yeah, but how do you come up with a terabyte per month?
Easily. I mean, one Steam I had to re-download Call of Duty Cold War because the thing that they did for the update broke. Is I had to re-download the files. That one game download was like 180 gigs, just like that.
Okay.
So
where did the other 900 go?
Well, 180. So that was basically 200. I mean, the podcast. We probably use maybe 30 to 40 gigabytes. Probably just uploading the podcast and doing the No. Stetson, how big is a YouTube file to upload generally? Like 2 to 3 gigs.
So to put it in perspective, when I download this after the show, it'll be probably 500 megabytes max.
500 megabytes max.
It's not that much.
It's at 720p. So
True.
I feel like Dennis, your higher use is probably just the games, keeping your game
Yeah,
library updated
but
and
but
those.
but it's the games that you're downloading that's driving it, not the gaming.
No, yeah, no. Yeah, I know it's not the gaming. Gaming itself online uses very
Yeah,
little data, but it's the files. But
yeah, it's the files that they are killing you, because if you look at it, standard video is 1 megabit per second.
yeah, but no one watches standard.
HD is 5, and 4K is 25.
That's me. 4K Netflix and HBO Max with the
Yeah,
Dolby Atmos. That's me. Yeah.
that's when you're getting them, right? By the way, if you want to know what you use on your computer, Glasswire is awesome. Glasswire.com.
We'll check it out. Thank you
Yeah.
for that tip. This kind of brought up a similar point that I was wondering about related to priority data. You know, a lot of carriers are promoting their priority data. They're reserving it for their top paying postpaid customers. My question is, how much of a difference does having priority data make to average consumers? Like, would they notice being prioritized versus deprioritized? What's your take on that?
Most of the time, no. I think prioritization comes in 5% of the time, something like that.
Sure, and
You
it's
have
at
to
like,
be at busy hour in a congested site. That's it.
yeah, okay.
Um,
Yeah,
you know,
that makes sense. That makes sense.
I'll
Um,
take it, but I wouldn't pay a premium for it.
I see. I see. That makes sense. Yeah, so that really would kind of go back to the subscription services that are really driving the customers to upgrade, to want to get that extra
Mhm.
plan. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it's something that doesn't cost you much as a carrier, and it sounds really good. Oh, you prioritize data.
Yeah,
Who says no to that, right?
right, right. Um,
So, Roger, I just thought of a good question for you. You know, when we were talking about that example from earlier, you mentioned that there is going to be a need for millimeter wave to be deployed in certain places, right?
Hmm.
But it sounds like from what we've been hearing from the public is that T-Mobile doesn't really have an interest on that. They really want to focus on that 2.5 gigahertz spectrum they acquired from Sprint, and they're focusing heavily on mid-band. Verizon seems to, now that they've acquired the CBRS spectrum from the auction, seems to also be taking that approach. And then AT&T seems like they've also been doing a similar thing.
Hmm.
So why, if the carriers know that they need millimeter sites, they need to densify, why aren't they doing it?
Because it's really expensive to build out the United States 200 yards at a time, right? Um, when uh, with a 2.5 or C-band site, you can cover 2 miles, right? And the speeds, unless you go for fixed wireless home internet replacements, are more than enough, right? Because what's the customer going to do? Watch a video on 4K, right? The picture isn't that much better. The movie doesn't end earlier, and the happy end is not happening either, right? So um, you're trying to improve, but uh, we will not build out the United States in millimeter wave uh, anytime.
Well, even if we just focused on the urban markets, right? Take Pittsburgh, for example, right?
Hmm.
I haven't seen a single millimeter wave site come to my city of
Hmm.
Pittsburgh. And that's a
Okay.
pretty urban city, right? I mean, it's not the biggest in the world, but still.
Yeah.
And I know that there's fiber sprawled all across the city, especially down by Carnegie Mellon and the college, right? So
Hmm.
the fiber's already ran. It's just a matter of getting the permits and saying, here we go, on the light pole it goes. Um, and it's something that if we're talking about the future, because you said before, like the carriers had to invest anyway in 5G earlier on when I was talking about growth. You said, well, they
Hmm.
knew they had to invest anyway. Well, millimeter wave and small cells is an investment they're going to have to do sooner or later, especially when we start talking about the future of 6G, I'm sure a decade
Yeah.
from now. So why are they kind of sticking their heels in the ground, so to speak?
Because it's really, really expensive, and the range is really short, and it doesn't penetrate walls, right? Um, I love one of the Verizon examples that shows a customer on their porch in Minneapolis and shows like their phone with, 2 gigabits per second in summer. You know why they're on the porch?
Because they
Because
can't
they
get
can't get
inside.
inside. Yeah.
Exactly. I want to see the same commercial in winter,
But
right?
with
And
problem,
and the same thing in a business environment. If you want to have gigabit bit speed with millimeter wave, you have to hang out with the smokers because you're not getting inside. So when you see Verizon making deals with various companies to do this indoors, the reason is because the damn thing doesn't go through walls, right? That's why you need an antenna inside.
That makes sense. That makes
but
sense.
with problem, one of my favorite sayings is with problem comes opportunity.
Hmm.
So the pessimist would look at that and be like, well, a millimeter wave is useless.
Yeah.
But the opportunist would look at, okay, here's the problem. It has poor propagation. How do I solve this? And we're seeing Verizon in certain markets where they do have millimeter wave sites give consumers essentially a repeater, basically, to get the signal inside the house. And
$200 later.
and I'm sure there's going to be other things in play. Like, for example, the people that talk about like set the standards for like 6G and stuff, they're talking about having devices actually talk to themselves to actually repeat connections and stuff like that. So there's stuff that's on the horizon. But before any of that can happen, it still doesn't change the fact that the core infrastructure needs to be put there. And it's just interesting that no one's getting it done, especially when we talk about how they need to differentiate themselves.
The laws of physics don't change because you don't like them, right? If you jump out of the window, no matter how much you don't want to fall to the ground, you will. And the same thing with electromagnetic spectrum. Depending on the material, the stuff doesn't go through walls, simply because the electromagnetic waves get blocked by atoms, right? And especially if you have like foil on the windows, like in office buildings, that thing is like solid, right?
Yeah.
You get more through a drywall than you get through these coated windows. And they're not going to tear down the building, 60
It'll be an
building
outdoor
tower,
pavilion. Come on,
or
Roger.
change the windows so that we get 5G. So they're working all of that. So, and then the problem is, we all change carriers, right? So, are you willing to have 3 carrier pucks in your room, right? So that you can in building that. By the way, that puck still has to go through the wall. So one of the problems that like companies like Starry have, with mid-band internet, is to get through the walls. How do you get through the wall? How do you break the wall? How do you break the window? Literally, that's the problem. Because the degradation is so much when you go through walls.
Yeah,
in lower spectrum, it's about 15 dB that happens when you go through a wall. And so one of the things we might see, and there's a lot of talk in commercial real estate, that wireless becomes the, fifth utility. Water, gas, heat, cooling, right? And that. Will your residential building do the same thing? Right? That would be the ideal solution. And then you have a DAS everywhere. I think it will be a while until we see this in apartment buildings. We see it first in office buildings. And then the question is always, who will pay for it? Right? So I hear you, but there are really big physical problems attached to it. And then it turns into money. Right?
Yeah, it sounds like it's just a matter of investment. Like if you have $18,000 to build a 1 millimeter wave site, it sounds like the carriers right now get more ROI putting it towards building out and developing their mid-band spectrum or
Yeah,
other sites like
way
that.
bigger buck.
It's just the. I know you have a question, Stetson. I just want to just retort one quick thing. The problem is that you can only buy so many macro sites, right? Like in cities like Pittsburgh, they're not going to let you slap down a macro cell in the most optimal place to get coverage covering the most optimal part of the cell. So either you have one or two options at that point. You either put down micro cells, even if it's not millimeter wave, like you got to put down something to densify, or you just have a coverage gap. And the carrier that decides to do it, which in my market, who has the best coverage right now is AT&T, then they're the clear choice for everybody here, and you have no options.
But I've also been expert witness for all the wireless carriers to build cell sites. And the municipalities are fighting it tooth and nail, right?
Right.
I testified in federal court. The city, T-Mobile against the city of Huntington Beach in California, went to federal court. T-Mobile wanted to raise the church steeple by 3 feet,
I remember that story.
right?
Yeah.
And the city of Huntington Beach didn't let them because it made an impact on the neighborhood. What? You have a 30-foot high tower, and making it 3 foot higher makes it different? No, right?
Right.
And so they sued. We won because I told to the judge that basically the city of Huntington Beach says in building wireless is irrelevant, and if you slip in your shower, it's reasonable to crawl out to the driveway to call 911. It's insane. But the in-building solution for most of Americans is Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
That's why they have Wi-Fi calling. Broadband speeds are getting better, right? We're getting Wi-Fi 6, right?
Yeah.
And that has a gigahertz of spectrum. So with Wi-Fi 6, you will get 5G speeds thanks to your cable connection or your fiber internet.
That would be awesome. Roger, we have a question from the audience here from Austin. He's asking, how do you feel about T-Mobile rolling out 5G to government enterprise? With their recent initiative, I'm curious what new tech or new capabilities is being introduced to support that.
They're basically selling to the government and enterprises the same thing that they sell to consumers. And T-Mobile traditionally hasn't sold to that. They have like 1% market share.
Sure.
The big customers of the government wireless were typically AT&T and Verizon. And they're simply going to the government and enterprise users, say, we have this awesome brand new 5G network for less. Want to have more? Right?
Yeah.
And consumers say, and businesses and enterprises like, yeah. And on top of it, they're saying if you're traveling internationally, I have this free data roaming, very basic, all of that stuff, free text messaging. Why don't you do that? Because the other carriers are still charging premium pricing for that. And it drives people up the tree, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, those prices are huge. It's like another $70 on top of the $70 or $80 you're paying. It's really expensive.
For business, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
But it hurts you emotionally.
Right. So I guess kind of maybe we could end off on maybe your take on home internet. You know, T-Mobile kind of teased their event coming up on April 7th. If you need a hint, and you know, home internet seems to be implied with that hint. Kind of, I guess, what's your take on the current landscape of home internet offerings, and where do you see those going?
I think it will be a really awesome solution as long as they're not successful.
That those sound backwards to me, Roger. Would you care to elaborate a little bit?
Well, wireless is a shared resource, right?
Yes, yes.
And the more successful they are with selling broadband to the home wirelessly, the smaller the slice you get,
Ah,
right?
so they need it to basically target a niche audience so that their network can remain open for the rest of the wireless consumers.
Yeah. So they will be very targeted of where they can buy and what you can buy. And they have to match the demand with how much they can build out.
So Roger,
Because the worst thing that happens is, oh, you can have these speeds. Then 1,000 people sign up, and the speeds goes down.
They tank.
Exactly.
so Roger, you're telling me
So
that
that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
so Roger, you're telling me that
But I'm looking forward to it, right? But it it makes a lot of sense for them in rural and suburban markets. In urban markets, high population density, I don't think they will sell their home internet.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
so
Um,
so Roger, you're telling me that cell phones providers aren't going to be able to necessarily replace proper home internet for rural Americans? Do you think that won't be a likely outcome?
sorry, were you able to hear that, Roger?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, interesting. Let me see.
Dennis
Um,
went black for me. I see the
I
name, but nothing else.
let
I
me
am
try. Is
Can
he
you hear me
back
now, Roger? You hear me?
Nope.
Well, maybe we'll just call it there then.
Sorry.
But Roger, we want to give you a tremendous thank you for taking your time to chat with us about these different network strategies, where you see them going in the future. I know you've done huge analysis and deep dives on these carriers with your company, Recon Analytics. So if anyone in the audience is interested in learning more about some of the bleeding wireless technology, you can check out Recon Analytics, linked in the show notes and the video description. Roger's authored many of the excellent papers there, with information that sometimes goes over my head, but we really appreciate it. Anything you want to let the audience know? I mean, you have your podcast that's also weekly. Yeah, anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, we have a weekly podcast called theweekwithroger.com. You can see some of the things that I publicize on Fierce Wireless. And I really appreciate being on the show. And thank you very much. And it was a blast being here.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Well,
Roger.
thank you again, Roger.
Thank you.
And we appreciate having you on.
Thanks, Stetson. Thanks, Dennis. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.